So, hi everyone, thanks for joining this session on how to learn fast-changing tech in a post-pandemic, attention-starved world. So I want to get one thing out there first straight away. Learning tech is hard. That's why people have come from all over the world for this conference and paid money to come and learn tech in this environment. So, does anyone recognize this spreadsheet? Has anyone seen it before? No?
Yeah.
What is it?
The one that they posted for SQL bits as to how many people were speaking.
Yeah, for this conference, yeah, absolutely. So there were over 1,000 submissions for this conference across 400 speakers. And the organizers had the enviable task of choosing just 200 sessions and speakers. And one thing you'll notice from here is the volume of ones against different topics. So we can see there's hundreds against things like data visualization and modeling. And if you look at the scope of all of these different types of topics, apart from the non-technical, there's topics across every single area. And this is one of the things that makes learning tech so hard. Because if you try and focus on just one particular area, say data visualization, Power BI, that's great, but then you might lack the perspective on how that integrates with the rest of the ecosystem, which could be a problem. And you also end up with the fear of missing out on all of the other cool stuff that's going on across everything else. But if you try and learn all of those areas that we just saw on that slide, then you run the risk of spreading yourself too thin and burning out. So one of the things that I want to tell you a bit of a personal story. So when I first started engaging with the community, it was when I joined Altius back in 2017. I came from KPMG as a financial modeler and an accountant, and I had to learn Power BI quite fast. And I engaged with the community, and there were conferences, and I'd always assumed that people were paid very handsomely to talk at conferences and to put out content on the internet. For me, that was just how conferences worked. You pay the speakers, and then I realized that a lot of conferences were free, and there were a lot of content for free, and I was like questioning the business model of this, like how does that work? How are you not charging for it? And then I realized that actually that wasn't the case, that people were talking for free. And then I just questioned the intelligence of the speakers, because I'm just like, why would these people give away all this knowledge for free when companies can and clearly are willing to pay for this knowledge? It just doesn't make any business sense. And these guys are supposed to be business consultants. I mean, seriously, what idiots, right? So, and then I thought, right, definitely not going to learn anyone from these people. So I just got my head down and started learning Power BI. And I had to learn it well enough to be able to stand in front of clients as the expert. And as soon as I started learning it, so there was data visualization, there was data modeling, there was DAX. And the further I got into these things, the deeper I realized how far the rabbit hole went, and the more scared I got about. And this was 2017, by the way, so far less features than there are in the product now. And yeah, so none of this made any sense. And it really just took a few months for the penny to really drop, for me to realize that the only reason there were so many speakers and people willing to put content out and give talks and put hours and hours into these talks as well. Like, it's really time consuming to prepare even a 20-minute session at a conference like this, and they're busy people. The only reason people were willing to do that for free was because it was the only way they could keep learning. And I want you to kind of hold that thought, and we'll come back to it, right? So the only reason that so many people were willing to talk at these conferences and put content out there for free is because it's the only way they could keep learning. So that brings us to this session. And this session is all about you as avid learners of the Microsoft technology stack. And it's hard. It's exhausting to learn this stuff, to keep on top of all of the changes, to keep on top of all the stuff that's coming out. When you've got time commitments, you've got a full-time job, you've got a family, you've got all of the other things in your life that demand your time and attention. So to do all of that while still trying to keep up and learning is hard. So I want to give you some of my tips from the last few years around how I've been able to maybe make this work, not really stay sane, but anyway, we'll pretend that I have for now. And I am going to go out on a limb here and say, I'll probably come back on this watch this recording back in a few years' time and laugh at my naivety. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say ChatGPT isn't the answer for it right now. Maybe later. So, I said this session was about you, so I'm not going to really talk about me, but I think the only thing I want to bring out is the only thing that qualifies me somewhat to stand here and talk about this topic is that I'm a lifelong learner myself. And that's what all of these kind of symbols mean in my role as a consultant, group manager at Avanade, in my role as an MVP, where I run 2 communities, so Learn Data Insights and Power Platform Finance, as an accountant who's studied for the accounting qualifications, and I'm actually also doing an MBA at the moment as well from an American institution called Quantic. So as if I didn't have enough on my plate, I'm doing lots of other stuff as well. And so yeah, that's kind of, all of this is learning, continuous learning. And so I want to give you 3 tips for learning this tech. And for each tip, I want to explain what it is and then give you an example from some of the contents that I've produced in the past or that I'm producing now. Now, I don't want you to take that as being like, I've got the best content out there. I definitely don't. There's people with much, much better content on the internet out there. But with the content that I've put together, I can at least explain my motivations and explain what I was trying to get across for those people consuming it. And it is always important, like with Power BI, like with everything else, it's always important to think about your audience. So I'll have a go at explaining what my thought process was for the content that I've done and the audience I was trying to reach with it. So the first tip is that you have to have a purpose for what you're learning. And it has to be a goal that you could work on straight away, right now, not something I want to do in a few years' time. And it can't be just that there's some cool stuff, like Python looks like it's got loads and loads of use cases, and it seems like a really, really good thing to learn. It will help my career at some point. Let me learn that. It's a good reason to learn Python, but it's probably not good enough. Right? What you actually need is a real problem or a real thing to work on now. Now, that could be an exam. You want to get certified. Maybe you want to get another job down the line, or you think it'll be good in your CV. Or it could be you're working with a client on data flows and your volumes have increased and your performance is bad. So you think, actually, I want to move this to Azure. That's a very specific thing that you need to learn and a specific set of skills that you need to pick up. Because that's what having a purpose and having a goal allows you to do. It allows you to identify those very specific skills that you need to focus on. So if you are studying for an exam, you can go through the exam syllabus and find those areas that you're not so strong on and focus just on learning those specific things. And don't try and learn it all, because that's, again, where it becomes too hard. And you can learn other stuff later on. You can have, if you want to learn broad stuff, you can have different goals at different times to do AZ 900, then PL 900, then DP 500, all of those things as a longer-term goal, but not all at the same time. So you have to focus ruthlessly on those specific skills that you have a purpose to learn right now. And this is also quite challenging because even an exam syllabus is quite broad. Even if you want to apply Azure for ETL, it's quite broad. So one of the best ways that I find to kind of identify and fill knowledge gaps is to test yourself. So I put out a lot of quizzes for the community on my website, learndatainsights.com. There's like thousands of questions, 12,000 people have taken it, and over 85,000 quiz attempts. And I've spoken to quite a few of those users, and they all have a goal. All of them are coming to the website to do something, and generally to take a Microsoft exam, but it doesn't have to be. And they all find these really useful, these links to learn more. Whether they get the question right or wrong, it gives them an explanation and it gives them links to learn more. So it's a way for them to identify, do I know this, yes or no? And if so, or even if not, then I can go and learn a bit more about it. So really important to be able to identify and fill knowledge gaps. The second tip is that it's not enough to be a passive consumer of content, right? To consume content like you just watch a Netflix show. Because yes, you could learn a lot by just watching videos, reading blogs, seeing other people do things. But the only problem with that is, how do you know you've actually learned it? You know you've spent an hour watching a video, your clock tells you that, you're reading a blog, but how do you know it's actually sunk in? Enough for you to go and then apply it. So to do that, you have to actually apply it. And ideally, you have to apply it as soon as possible. This is some research from, it's called, if you want to Google it, it's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And what it says is that if new information isn't applied, we'll forget about 75% of it after just 6 days. So you can see the retention there, it just drops off a cliff. And actually you need to keep doing it in that period, and then you'll remember it much, much better. But if you don't apply the information, you'll lose it. So really, really important to be active in that. Now, the best place to apply what you learn is at work, on your data, on your processes, not necessarily on AdventureWorks, because then you come back to your desk and realize AdventureWorks is nothing like the data you have to deal with. So that is definitely the best place to work, to apply it. But I'm not oblivious to the fact that that carries a degree of risk, because perhaps you're already expected to know it, right? Because my clients are paying a lot of money for me to consult them, and I've always got the back of my head, well, they're not paying me to learn. I need to do that myself. Now, what you need to find is then a safe environment to practice in, to apply in. Now, actually, that could be work. And actually, it might well be. For a lot of people, that will be work. And you have to just manage those expectations with your clients and stakeholders, say, look, this stuff is changing. I need to learn the new stuff if we're going to apply it. And manage those expectations so that becomes a safe environment if it isn't already. Equally, you can create the safe environment yourself. You can look for data that interests you. There's data on every industry, on every topic, and you can just find that and build your own solutions. And the real advantage of that is you're in charge of your own solutions. I can't build the solutions exactly what I want to learn for my clients because they have specific problems. Whereas if I build something for the community, I could put whatever I wanted to it. I could put whatever I want to learn as part of that solution that makes sure I can apply whatever I've just learned. And actually, to be fair, that's how I learnt all of the stuff for the exams. I actually wrote all the questions for all of those exams before I sat the exams, because that was my way of learning it. Rather than just going through the material and thinking, God, I hope I understood that, I had to write questions on it, and that forced me to think about it. And forced me to think of the distractive answers so that I could work out what's wrong as well. So for me, the community is definitely a safe environment. I make mistakes all the time, actually, in the community, especially for content I put out there for free. The community highlights my mistakes. I get loads of feedbacks on the quizzes, and I'm able to correct those and learn from them. So community is definitely a safe environment, but there could be others as well. And this is the challenge with that as well, is that sometimes that doesn't work for everyone. It's very time consuming to do that, obviously. And maybe if you're not able to do that, the other way to try and apply what you learn is to find the kind of training that allows you to practice, that allows you to apply what you learn straight away, with labs, with hands-on exercises. So I said I'll give us some examples. I did on Wednesday a pre-con for this conference, a full day on financial reporting with Power BI. And I'm making that content available as an e-learning course. And this is an example for one of the modules in my e-learning course where you have to go in and practice the clicks. It's not particularly difficult. You just go in there and it's just say click here, click here, click here. But at least you're building that muscle memory. You're building that applying of what you're learning, having just watched a video or read a blog. And just really important to try and find things that you can engage with and that are interactive. So not just sitting back and watching and consuming content. So the third tip is to focus on what's not changing, to focus on what's constant. And for this one, you really have to just experiment a little bit. So if you're in the Power BI space, for example, go and read some blogs, the monthly blogs that come out, but don't focus your learning on those because you'll constantly be trying to learn new things. Focus on things like data modeling, row and filter context in DAX, or data visualization, how to tell a story. Those things don't change no matter how many features Microsoft put out. And they have transferable skills that will take you from job to job, from role to role, and will be useful even if you're not working with any of the Microsoft stack. So focus on the fundamentals. And this is an example, again, from the e-learning course. It's an example of a StarNet. So it shows how to conceptually design a data model. You have your facts in the middle, and then you have dimensions branching off them. And you design this before you actually start building anything. Really, bus matrix as well, really useful techniques. What I presented last year at SQL Bits was a conference on storytelling with data, where he said, look at your audience. If it's executives, you just want big, bold numbers and give them the highlights. They don't need the detail. If it's analysts, you need to take them on that journey in essay format. So children's storybook for executive, essays for analysts, and think about it in that way. So again, these fundamentals don't change. So some of the top tips. Number one, have a purpose for what you want to learn. Have a goal that you can work on right now. Be active, not passive. Make sure that you're applying what you learn as soon as possible. And focus on what's not changing. Focus on the fundamentals, because those are the things that are going to put you. Before I leave you, I've only got a few minutes left. I want to obviously highlight the bonus tip that I've been alluding to throughout this whole session, and it was in the abstracts, to be fair, which is to really elevate your learning, you need to teach. And I put here teach your team, because your team are probably the people that are most likely to listen, and you could use your corporate data or client data. But actually, it doesn't have to be your team if you're not comfortable with that. You could teach your spouse or your dog. It's anyone who will listen. And the purpose of doing this teaching is to get feedback. And one thing I do want to highlight is that feedback is not criticism. If you're in a place where feedback is used as a stick to beat you with, when the economy takes a downturn, you're in the wrong company, right? And you're in the wrong environment. So make feedback part of your journey. And just very quickly here, what I want to highlight is this is something called the learning experience loop. And what it shows is how you build content iteratively and learn from it. So actually, I'm doing this in my MBA capstone, because how you do this is the same as how you do a startup, using the build, measure, learn feedback loop. You have hypotheses around, or you do training needs assessments. You understand your customer. You do customer discovery. You then have hypotheses around how to solve their pain points. You understand their pain points, have hypotheses around how to solve them. You then build MVP products. In this case, it would be a blog or a video or something. And then you get feedback and say, did this work? How can I do it better? And so that minimum viable product, that minimum viable learning, allows you to then iterate and iterate. And each time you get the feedback, and the learner goes through a loop as well. They learn, they practice what they've learned, they feed back on it, and then they share it with others so that others get that elevated learning. And it's a virtuous cycle around learning and developing content. If you're lucky enough to work in a company that has a learning and development team, reach out to them. They should know this stuff. This is instructional design. The problem is most of these teams don't talk to each other. So people would just do learning themselves without talking to their HR team or the L&D team. And yeah, this is from Learning at Speed. I've got a copy of the book, actually, if anyone wants to have a scan on it. So on the note of feedback, please do provide some feedback. And actually, I just want to highlight one thing, if I've got 1 minute left. So if you liked this session, obviously, please let me know. And if you have some constructive criticism, I promise I won't take it personally, and I'll apply it. But actually, if you did like this session, you also have the community in part to thank. So last night, I sent the video to someone I met on the course, who attended my training day on Wednesday. I was talking to her about it afterwards, and then I was talking about the session, and I said, oh, could I send it to you? She's like, yep. Sent it to her. She watched the video, wrote a full couple of pages of notes, sat with me at the bar at 11 o'clock last night in the hotel. I went through changes on how to do it. And this was someone I met the day before, right? So, someone I just met who attended my course is now my mentor. And that's the power of community. That's the power of feedback. That's the power of it. You being in that safe space where you could learn, teach, and do everything all within the same time. And yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and look forward to taking any questions after this. Thank you very much.